For Richard, back in the United States, life tried to resume its old rhythm. The first night, he barely slept. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of standing at a gate, his gate in Lagos, while the blind lady stood across from him. This time, she said nothing. She only shook her head. Richard woke up sweating. 2 days later, he stepped into his office, greeted by familiar smiles. "Welcome back, sir," his secretary said brightly. Richard forced a smile. Good to be back. He sat at his desk and logged into his system. A notification popped up. Account restricted, pending review. Richard frowned. That wasn't possible. He refreshed the page. Same message. He picked up his phone and dialed his bank manager. "Richard?" The man sounded cautious. "I was just about to call you." "What's going on?" Richard demanded. "Why is my account restricted?" A pause. "There's been a flag," the manager said carefully. "A large international transaction linked to an entity currently under investigation." Richard's chest tightened. "Which entity?" The manager hesitated. "Goldcrest Real Estate." Richard's vision blurred. Back in Nigeria, Bayo in the hospital woke up feeling stronger and better than he had been some days back. Knowing his family would be worried, he asked for a phone with which he reached out to tell them what happened, but that he was okay. Days later, after more checks and prayers whispered under his breath, Bayo was discharged. As he stepped out into the hospital compound, something caught his attention. His car, parked neatly by the fence. Bayo froze. He walked closer, running his fingers across the bonnet as if afraid it would disappear. A security man smiled. "You recognize Am?" "Yes," Bayo replied slowly. "This is my car. Oga, the man that rushed you here, drove that car in some minutes later. He said it was yours and that we should keep it safe," the guard explained. Bayo swallowed hard. A stranger had saved his life, then quietly disappeared. After resting for a day, Bayo did what he felt he had to do. He drove straight to the Airbnb where he used to pick Richard. The gate man stared at him. "You are looking for that American man?" "Yes," Bayo replied. "Tall, rich, always serious." The gate man shook his head. He came back with 2 policemen, packed his things, and left suddenly. No goodbye. Bayo nodded slowly, grateful that at least he didn't lose his life after he was taken. He thanked the gate man and left. That was the end of that. Life, as life always does, moved on. He returned to driving this time fully on his own, offering cab hire services. His days became predictable again. Traffic, passengers, laughter, complaints, prayers whispered at junctions. Gradually, he put the memory of that scary evening behind him. He continued with his cab hire duties until one evening, he had just dropped off a passenger on a quiet street. As he turned the car around, his headlights brushed past a familiar figure standing alone by the roadside. Bayo's heart skipped. It was the blind lady. She stood calmly, her white cane resting beside her, face turned toward the road like she was waiting for something or someone. Bayo parked abruptly and jumped out. "Ah," he exclaimed softly, "it's you." She turned her face toward his voice. "Good evening," she said gently, as if they had been expecting each other. Bayo approached carefully. "Please," he said. "Who are you? Where do you live?" She smiled faintly. "The river does not announce where it flows from," she replied. "Yet it quenches thirst." Bayo frowned. "I mean, your house?" She tilted her head. "Some people live in rooms," she said. "Some live in moments." A chill ran through him. He cleared his throat. "I don't know if you remember me. I was the driver of that man you warned that day, the one you stopped at the gate. I remember footsteps," she said calmly, "not faces." Bayo nodded quickly. He didn't listen. Everything went wrong. On our way home after the deal, we were attacked and he was taken deep into the forest. Thankfully, he escaped. She sighed, not surprised. "When rain is announced and you refuse to roof your house," she said, "you cannot ask the sky why you are wet." Bayo felt his knees weaken. The blind lady adjusted her grip on her cane, preparing to walk away. Just then, a woman carrying a handbag hurried past them. "Madam?" the blind lady called softly. The woman stopped, startled. "Your stepsister is coming to you tonight," she said. "She will bring bread, eat food, drink water, but do not eat that bread." The woman stared at her in shock, wondering how she knew her stepsister was coming. Before she could speak, Bayo stepped forward urgently. "Madam, please, I beg you, do as she says." The woman looked from Bayo to the blind lady, then nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you both." She hurried away. Bayo turned back, breathing hard. Awe filled his voice. "Please," Bayo said. "I need your number, just in case." The blind lady smiled again, sadly this time. "I don't carry what rings," she replied. "I carry what warns." Then she turned and walked away. Bayo stood there, stunned. In seconds, she blended into the evening crowd, vanished, as though she had never stood there at all. Bayo whispered to himself, "Some people are blind, yet see for all of us." Back in the United States, Richard was no longer the man his friends once knew. Though life around him appeared normal, his house still stood, his cars still moved, his wife still smiled, something inside him had changed. He woke up unhappy and went to bed unsettled. Even on quiet days, his mind felt heavy, crowded with thoughts he could not escape. His American wife noticed it more than anyone. "Rich," she would say gently, sitting beside him on the couch, "you didn't lose your life. That's what matters." Richard would nod, but the comfort never stayed long. Over and over again, he regretted not listening to the strange blind lady. He wished he could turn back the hands of time. One afternoon, about a year after he returned to the US, Richard was working on his laptop. A new email notification popped up. From Nigeria police subject. Update on case reported Richard's heart. Skipped. He opened it. "We write to inform you that one Samuel Okafor has been apprehended and is currently in custody. Kindly indicate if you are willing to assist with further investigation." Richard leaned back slowly, his hands trembling. They had him. Without hesitation, he booked a flight back to Nigeria. 1 week later, Richard stood inside the police station he never thought he would return to. An officer led him down a narrow corridor. "He's waiting," the officer said. The door opened. Samuel sat on a bench, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the smile that once sold fake promises. Richard stopped in front of him. For a moment, neither spoke. "Can I have a moment with him?" Richard asked quietly. The officer nodded and stepped outside. Richard pulled a chair and sat across from his cousin. "Why?" he asked simply. "What did I ever do to deserve this?" Samuel's lips trembled. He bowed his head, then suddenly broke down. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he cried. "Please forgive me, Richard." Richard remained silent. Samuel wiped his face and began to speak. "We grew up together," he said between sobs. "We were boys together." Richard listened, his jaw tight. "But when you were 10, Samuel continued, "your parents travelled abroad and that was it. Everything changed. All I heard after that was stories. Richard this, Richard that, best schools, big jobs, big money. And me? I stayed here. I went to school, yes. I graduated. But nothing ever worked. No job lasted. No business grew. I watched life pass me by. When you started calling me," Samuel continued, "telling me about your success, how you worked hard, how everything opened up for you, jealousy entered my heart, especially because you never helped me. You only gave me just a little amount of money a couple of times, which to me was too small." "It's Ali." Samuel's voice dropped. "I told my friend James about you and then he suggested it. He said, if he has so much, what's wrong with taking some? I thought for a while. I liked the idea. That's the truth." Silence filled the room. Richard stared at the man he once called family, realizing too late that envy, left unchecked, could destroy blood itself. Samuel wiped his face with trembling hands. "There's more," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't plan everything myself. I couldn't. It was James. He was the brain behind it all. He introduced the idea of the fake real estate company. He knew men who could print documents, rent offices, act like lawyers. Even the land inspection was staged. They already knew which land to show you, which survey pegs to use, what to say." Richard closed his eyes slowly. "And the kidnap?" he asked. Samuel's shoulders shook violently. That was never meant to scare you," he whispered. "The plan was for you never to come back. The plan was to pick you up, take you far into the forest, and end your life. They said if you disappeared, no one would question the deal. Your money would already be gone. The company would vanish. Everything would end there. But the men came back," Samuel said quickly. "They said something went wrong. They said security men appeared suddenly in the bush and they had to run. They said you would definitely find your way back. That's when I knew you were alive. That's when fear entered me. I packed my things and left my house immediately. I changed my numbers. I knew you would come looking for me." Samuel slid off the bench and knelt on the floor. "Richard, forgive me," he cried. "I beg you. Please, forgive me." For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then he stood up. Disappointment, not anger, filled his eyes. "We grew up together," he said quietly. "If you needed help, you should have asked, not assumed that I owed you success, not turned jealousy into wickedness. Besides, I sent your money a couple of times." Samuel wept uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "Please drop the charges, I beg you." Richard shook his head slowly. "No, Samuel, I won't. You didn't just steal from me, Richard continued. You tried to erase me. Me, Samuel. What did I ever do to you? The choice you made has consequences. Deal with it. With that, Richard got up, turned toward the door, and walked out without a word. He ordered a cab and began the journey back to his hotel, where he lodged. The cab moved slowly through the evening traffic as Richard leaned back, drained. His heart was broken, still shocked that his beloved cousin could be that evil. He was, however, grateful that he had been caught and justice would be served. Just as the car approached a quiet stretch of road, Richard's eyes caught a familiar sight. His breath caught. By the roadside stood the blind lady. She wasn't alone. She was speaking to a young man who looked restless, shifting from one foot to the other, his phone clenched tightly in his hand. "Stop," Richard said sharply. The cab driver braked in surprise. "Sir, please, stop here." Before the car fully halted, Richard flung the door open and stepped out. He began to walk quickly, almost running, afraid she would disappear again like smoke, just the way she did the last time he saw her. This time, she didn't vanish. As he moved close to her, he could hear her voice. Another warning. "Do not take that journey tonight," she said to the man softly. The young man frowned. "But I already told them I'm coming." "Delay it by one day," she replied. "The road will open again tomorrow. Tonight it closes." He hesitated. "What do you mean?" She lifted her face slightly. "When the moon hides, metal will argue with metal. Those who rush will not return with their plans." The young man swallowed. Silence hung between them. Then he nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said. "I'll wait." He took a step back, looked at her once more with respect, then turned and walked away without another word. Richard stood frozen. There was no doubt now. Face to face. He moved closer. "Excuse me," he said carefully. She turned toward his voice immediately. "You are breathing faster than before," she said gently. "But your heart is quieter." Richard's throat tightened. "Do you remember me?" She was silent for a moment. "The man at the gate who laughed," she said. Richard nodded. "You warned me. Everything you said came to pass." He took a slow breath. "I lost my peace. I lost my money. I nearly lost my life." She lowered her head. "I tried to stop you," she said simply. "I am so grateful to be alive to tell my story right now," Richard replied, stepping closer. With his voice trembling, he asked, "Please tell me, who are you? Where are your parents? Why are you always walking these streets alone?" The blind lady sighed deeply. "A lot of people have asked me this question, and I have refused to talk. I don't know why I feel I can talk to you," she said softly. She folded her cane against her chest, lifted her face toward the darkening sky, and began to speak. Her voice was calm but heavy, like someone who had carried pain for far too long. "My name is Adana. I was not born this way. I remember seeing things once. I remember my mother's face. I remember the color of the sky in the evening and how the sun looked when it was about to sleep. I remember running barefoot on the sand and laughing without fear. My father died when I was very small. I was too young to understand what death meant, but I understood absence. I understood that one morning he left and never came back. From that day, It was only my mother and me against the world. She was everything to me. She sold food in the market. Some days she returned with money. Some days she returned with only stories and tired eyes. But she never returned without love. Even when our stomachs were empty, her arms were full. Then I became sick. It started quietly. I would wake up and my eyes would burn. The world would look cloudy, like it was covered with smoke. At first, everyone thought it was small, ordinary fever, ordinary infection. My mother was not afraid then. She believed it would pass. But it did not pass. The pain grew worse. Light began to hurt me. Faces started losing their shape. One day, I woke up and could barely recognize my mother's shadow. That was the day fear entered our home and refused to leave. My mother carried me everywhere. She took me to hospitals where nurses spoke softly and doctors shook their heads when the medicines failed. She took me to herbalists who rubbed leaves on my eyes and promised recovery that never came. She took me to prayer houses where people shouted and pressed my head, telling her to believe more. Everywhere we went, hope entered and died. She never complained. Never. Even when her feet swelled from walking long distances, even when her body became thin from hunger, she would hold my hand at night and whisper, "Tomorrow will be better." But tomorrow kept disappointing her. As my sight faded completely, something else began to open inside me. I started dreaming things that later happened. I started knowing things I had not been told. At first, I thought it was imagination. Then I realized it was not. When I spoke, people became afraid. When I warned, some listened, many laughed. My mother did not know what to think. She only knew that her child was blind and growing stranger by the day. Still, she carried me, until one morning she could not stand up. She went to sleep but never woke up. The same hands that had held me everywhere could no longer lift themselves. She died quietly, without drama, without answers, just like that. When she didn't move that morning, I didn't understand at first. I shook her. I called her name. I waited for her to answer me the way she always did, even when she was too tired to lift her head. But she didn't move. When the truth finally settled into my chest, I screamed. I screamed until my throat burned. I screamed until neighbors came running. Their hands pulled me back. Their voices surrounded me. Their questions hit me like stones I could not see. Someone rushed to call my mother's family. They came the next day. They buried her quickly, too quickly for the woman who carried me through sickness, through pain, through the long hopelessness of my fading eyes. They said they were doing their duty. They prayed, they murmured, they spoke about destiny. I stayed with one of my distant relatives for a short time. She was not cruel, but she was tired. Tired of feeding another mouth. Tired of guiding someone who could not see. Tired of explaining to her husband why I should be kept. They never beat me, but their house was filled with sighs. Heavy sighs. The kind that follow you from room to room until you begin to feel like an unwanted shadow. One morning, the woman took me outside and placed my hand on the wooden bench by the door. "Wait here," she said. Her voice trembled. I waited. The sun rose, the sun moved, the sun went down. She never came back. A neighbor later told me quietly that she had left the house entirely, gone to join her sister in another town, leaving me with people who didn't even know my name. Those people confused and already struggling with their lives, began to argue about who should keep me. Their voices grew louder every day. I felt it. I heard it. And one evening, before their quarrels turned into something darker, I stood up and walked away, my cane guiding me. But I did not wander blindly. Someone found me. An old teacher, a woman who knew my mother when she was young. He had heard what happened and came searching. She had no husband or children. She took me in, cleaned me up, bought me 2 dresses, taught me how to use a cane, and told me something I never forgot. "You may not see the world," he said, "but the world will see you. Do not let them see you broken." I lived with her. I grew there. My gift of seeing the future grew. Every morning, I would walk to the roadside and deliver messages to passers-by, as led by the Spirit. I still live with her. Sometimes I leave the house and return after a week or 2, not as a beggar, not as someone lost, but as someone who had finally understood her path. "This is who I am," she finally concluded. Richard stood there for a long moment after she finished speaking, his chest heavy with emotions he could not name. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and sincere. "Please," he said, "let me help you. I can get you a place to stay. Proper care. Comfort. You shouldn't have to keep walking these streets alone." She smiled softly, peacefully. "I am not lacking," she replied. "I have known hunger, yes. I have known loss, but I am not empty. Fulfillment is not always loud, and comfort is not always found in walls." Richard tried again. "At least allow me to do something. Anything." She shook her head gently. "What you have already done is enough. You listened. That is rare." Still unwilling to leave it at that, Richard reached into his pocket. He took out his complimentary card and pressed it carefully into her open palm. "Keep this," he said. "If one day you change your mind, or if you ever need me any time, I will answer." She closed her fingers around the card without looking at it. Richard then brought out the little cash he had with him and placed it in her hand as well, not as charity, but as gratitude. "For reminding me how blind I truly was," he added quietly. She inclined her head slightly. "Go in peace," she said, "and keep listening." Richard stepped back, nodded once more, and turned to leave. As he walked away, a strange calm settled over him. He did not look back. He did not need to. For the first time in a long while, Richard felt light. Not because his problems had vanished, but because he had finally learned the sound of wisdom when it spoke. As for Samuel, the investigation moved quickly after his confession. His friend, James, the one who designed the scheme, and the so-called real estate manager were all arrested. Evidence piled up. The rented office, the forged documents, the accounts, the staged land inspection. In court, the truth came out fully. About 30% of Richard's money was recovered. Samuel and his gang were sentenced to 20 years in prison. No appeal changed it. As the gavel fell, Richard sat quietly in the courtroom, feeling no victory, only finality. Justice had spoken. He had learned his lessons never to trust anyone and never to ignore warnings. After the sentencing, things slowly began to change for Richard. A few days after leaving Nigeria, he received a call from his bank in the United States. The investigation that had placed his accounts under restriction had been concluded. The The fraud links had been clearly traced to Samuel and his accomplices, and Richard's name was officially cleared. By the end of that week, full access to his accounts was restored. Once, such news would have filled him with pride and excitement. Now, it only reminded him of how close he had come to losing everything. Money returned. Status returned. But humility stayed. And that, Richard knew, was the true gift he carried home.